In August of 2024, 8-year-old Lucas Morrison walked out of the Alaskan wilderness alone. He'd been missing for over 2 years. He wore oversized clothes that his father used to wear. When searchers asked where his family was, Lucas pointed back toward the trees and said, "They're waiting in the underneath place. The tall people said I could get help." His parents, David and Rachel Morrison, along with his 16-year-old sister Emma, had vanished without a trace during a family camping trip near Denali National Park in June of 2022. For 793 days, they existed only as names on missing person reports and faces on flyers that weather had long since faded. Then Lucas emerged from a forest that had already given up its secrets, carrying a story that made no sense and evidence that shouldn't exist. The boy's reappearance marked the beginning of an investigation that would challenge everything authorities thought they understood about missing persons cases. Because Lucas Morrison didn't just survive 2 years in the Alaskan wilderness. According to him, he'd only been gone for 5 days. David Morrison had planned the camping trip as a reset for his family. The software engineer from Anchorage worked 60-hour weeks, often missing Emma's basketball games and Lucas's school plays. Rachel, a part-time nurse, had been covering extra shifts at Providence, Alaska Medical Center, trying to build their savings before Emma started looking at colleges. The family had grown distant in the way that busy families do, sharing space but not time, talking logistics but not dreams. "We need this," David had told his brother Marcus during their last phone conversation. "Just us. No phones, no schedules. The kids barely know each other anymore, and Rachel and I—" He'd paused, looking out the window of their Anchorage home toward the mountains that promised escape. "We need to remember why we're doing this." The Morrisons had camped together before, but never this deep into the backcountry. David had chosen a remote area 40 miles northwest of Denali's main visitor center, accessible only by a rough logging road that petered out into a hiking trail. The spot offered everything he'd hoped for. No cell service, no other campers, nothing but forest and mountain silence. Emma hadn't wanted to go. At 16, she'd outgrown family adventures in favor of summer jobs and time with friends. Her parents had to confiscate her phone to ensure she'd come, a decision that would later haunt them in ways none of them could have imagined. Lucas, by contrast, had been excited. The 8-year-old collected rocks and pressed flowers, maintaining a nature journal with the careful attention other children devoted to video games. For him, the wilderness was a cathedral of curiosities waiting to be cataloged. On June 15th, the family loaded their blue Ford Explorer with camping gear, enough food for 5 days, and the careful optimism of people trying to repair something they couldn't quite name. David had studied topographical maps for weeks, marking water sources and emergency routes with the methodical precision of an engineer. Rachel had packed a first aid kit extensive enough for minor surgery. Emma brought sketchbooks she secretly hoped might help her document the trip for a college application essay about personal growth. Lucas brought his magnifying glass and collection jars, ready to preserve whatever wonders the forest might offer. They drove north through Alaska's brief summer morning, past Anchorage's suburban sprawl, and into the wild heart of the state. The logging road proved more challenging than David had anticipated. 2 hours of careful navigation through potholes that could swallow a tire and creek crossings that tested the explorer's clearance. But when they finally reached the trailhead at 3 p.m., even Emma admitted the spot was beautiful. The forest here grew different than the tourist areas near Denali's main roads. These were old trees, untouched by fire or cutting, their canopy dense enough to filter the June sunlight into cathedral columns. Beneath the spruce and birch, the understory spread thick with devil's club and ferns, creating a green maze that seemed to whisper promises of secrets hidden just beyond sight. A creek ran nearby, its water clear and cold from snowmelt higher up the mountains. "This is perfect," Rachel said, standing beside the explorer and breathing air so clean it made her lungs feel new. For the first time in months, her shoulders relaxed. The constant tension of managing work schedules and family logistics seemed to dissolve in the forest quiet. David set up the camp with military precision, while Lucas immediately began his exploration, crouching beside the creek to examine water beetles and smooth stones. Emma, initially sullen about her confiscated phone, found herself drawn to sketch the interplay of light and shadow through the canopy. The forest had a way of silencing complaints and awakening wonder, even in reluctant teenagers. That first evening passed like a memory of better times. They cooked over a camp stove, played cards by lantern light, and talked in a way they hadn't in years. Lucas regaled them with facts about forest ecosystems gleaned from nature documentaries. Emma shared stories about her art class that revealed ambitions her parents hadn't known she harbored. David and Rachel rediscovered the easy conversation that had drawn them together 20 years earlier, before mortgages and career pressures taught them to speak primarily in scheduling updates. "We should do this more often," Rachel said as they settled into their sleeping bags. Outside their tent, the forest created its nighttime symphony. The distant call of loons, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through ancient trees. "We will," David promised, and meant it. None of them could have known they had less than 18 hours left together. The next morning brought the kind of Alaskan June day that made the state's brutal winters seem worthwhile. Sunshine streamed through the forest canopy in golden shafts that turned the mist rising from the creek into ethereal veils. The air carried the scent of pine needles and wild roses, so pure it seemed to clean not just lungs but thoughts. Lucas was awake first as usual, his internal clock calibrated to adventure. He emerged from the tent to find the world transformed by morning light into something that belonged in fairy tales rather than real life. Every dewdrop on the ferns caught and fractured sunlight. Every bird call seemed designed to welcome him personally to the day. "Mom, Dad, Emma, you have to see this," he called, his voice carrying the excitement that 8-year-olds reserved for genuine magic. The family emerged from their tents to find their youngest member standing at the edge of camp, pointing toward a break in the trees they hadn't noticed the evening before. Through the gap, they could see a meadow carpeted with wildflowers that stretched toward distant peaks still crowned with snow. "Can we explore over there?" Lucas asked, his nature journal already in hand. David consulted his topographical map. The meadow appeared to be roughly half a mile away, accessible by what looked like a game trail. The route seemed straightforward, through the trees, across the meadow, back before lunch. An easy morning hike that would give Lucas new specimens and Emma new sketching subjects. "Stay together," Rachel said, her nurse's training making her cautious even in paradise. "And we're back here in 2 hours, no exceptions." They left camp at 9:17 a.m. on June 16th. According to the digital timestamp on Emma's camera, the last piece of electronic evidence the family would ever generate. David carried a day pack with water and snacks. Rachel brought the first aid kit, a habit so ingrained she felt naked outdoors without it. Emma took her sketchbook and camera. Lucas carried his collection supplies and the careful attention to detail that made him the family's unofficial nature guide. The game trail proved easier to follow than expected, winding between massive spruce trees whose trunks required 3 people holding hands to encircle. The understory here grew sparse, filtered sunlight, allowing only ferns and moss to carpet the forest floor. Their footsteps made almost no sound on the soft ground, creating an illusion that they were floating through a green dream. Emma found herself genuinely enjoying the hike despite her initial resistance to the entire trip. The forest provided endless subjects for her sketches, the way morning light transformed spider webs into jewelry, the architectural perfection of mushrooms growing from fallen logs, the faces she imagined in the bark patterns of ancient trees. She began to understand what her art teacher meant about finding inspiration in unexpected places. Lucas predictably stopped every few yards to examine some new wonder. He discovered beetle tracks in mud that recorded their tiny journeys like hieroglyphics. He found mushrooms in colors that seemed designed by someone with more imagination than nature usually displayed. His collection jars began to fill with specimens that would require careful research to identify once they returned home. David and Rachel walked together, talking quietly about the rhythm of their daily lives. and how rarely they move through the world at walking pace anymore. The forest imposed a different relationship with time, not the relentless march of schedules and deadlines, but the organic flow of seasons and growth and decay. For the first time in months, they felt like partners in adventure rather than co-managers of domestic logistics. The meadow, when they reached it, exceeded even Lucas's enthusiastic expectations. Wildflowers spread across several acres in patterns that seemed both random and designed. Lupine and paintbrush, fireweed and wild roses creating a carpet that shifted from purple to red to pink to white depending on the angle of view. Butterflies moved among the blooms like fragments of stained glass given flight. The air hummed with bees and carried a sweetness so intense it seemed to have substance. "This is going in the journal for sure," Lucas announced, immediately dropping to his knees to begin his detailed documentation process. Emma found a fallen log that provided the perfect vantage point for sketching the entire scene. David and Rachel spread a blanket and unpacked their snacks, content to watch their children engage with the world in ways that had nothing to do with screens or schedules. For 45 minutes, the Morrison family existed in a state of contentment so pure it would later seem impossible to those who tried to reconstruct their final day. Lucas filled 3 pages of his journal with drawings and observations. Emma completed 2 sketches and started a third. David took photographs with an old film camera he'd brought as backup, wanting physical prints of their adventure. Rachel simply watched her family, memorizing their faces in natural light, their bodies relaxed and open to wonder. At 10:52 a.m., according to Emma's camera timestamp, Lucas stood up from his flower examination and pointed toward the far edge of the meadow. "There's another trail over there. Can we see where it goes?" David checked his map again. The trail Lucas had spotted wasn't marked, but that wasn't unusual in this remote area. Game trails and old mining routes crisscrossed Alaska's wilderness, many too minor or overgrown to warrant cartographic attention. The trail appeared to lead toward a ridge that would offer views of the surrounding mountains. 15 minutes, David said. "Then we head back to camp." They walked across the meadow toward the tree line where Lucas had spotted the continuation of their adventure. The trail, when they reached it, proved to be more substantial than David had expected. Not a game trail, but something that showed signs of human use. The path was roughly 4 feet wide, cleared of major obstacles, with occasional blazes cut into trees that marked the route. "Looks like we're not the first people to find this place," Rachel observed. The trail curved into the forest, disappearing around a bend marked by a particularly massive spruce tree. Emma took one last photograph of the meadow before they entered the trees, an image that would later be studied by investigators trying to understand how 4 people could simply cease to exist. They walked single file now, David leading, followed by Lucas, then Emma, with Rachel bringing up the rear. The forest here felt different than the area around their camp, older, quieter, with an almost cathedral-like quality that made conversation feel inappropriate. The canopy grew so dense that only scattered beams of sunlight penetrated to ground level, creating an underwater effect that made movement feel dreamlike. Lucas's nature journal would later be found in their abandoned SUV containing his final entry. "Following new trail. Trees are really old here. Mom says we have to turn back soon, but I want to see where it goes. Emma is drawing everything. Dad looks happy. This is the best trip ever." The trail curved deeper into the forest, climbing gradually toward what David's map suggested was a ridge system that connected to the main Denali wilderness. Each turn revealed new wonders that delayed their promised return to camp. A creek crossing where the water ran over stones polished smooth as glass. A grove of birch trees whose white trunks created natural columns for a cathedral of leaves. A clearing where wild roses grew in such profusion their perfume seemed to have weight. Emma's camera captured their progress in a series of images that would later be analyzed frame by investigators desperate for clues. The photograph showed a family growing more relaxed and adventurous with each step deeper into the wilderness. David's posture straightened as the software engineer disappeared and something older, more primal, took his place. Rachel's face lost the careful control she maintained at the hospital, replaced by genuine joy. Emma's teenage self-consciousness dissolved into artistic focus. Lucas practically glowed with the pleasure of discovery. At 11:43 a.m., Emma took the last photograph on her camera, a shot of Lucas crouched beside a cluster of unusual mushrooms. His magnifying glass focused on their intricate gills while sunlight caught the concentration on his 8-year-old face. The image showed a boy completely absorbed in the world's small wonders, documenting nature with the seriousness of a scientist and the wonder of a child. After that, the Morrison family's documented existence simply ended. When they failed to return to camp by the promised time, when hours passed without their voices carrying through the forest, when night fell and their tent remained empty, there was no one to notice. They had chosen their isolation too well. The forest kept its silence, and 4 people who had awakened that morning to sunshine and possibility simply ceased to exist in any form the world could acknowledge. Their blue Ford Explorer remained at the trailhead, doors unlocked, supplies untouched. David's methodically planned maps lay spread on the front seat, marked with routes they would never travel. Rachel's extensive first aid kit waited uselessly for emergencies it would never treat. Emma's confiscated cell phone sat powerless in the glove compartment, its silence now permanent rather than imposed. For 26 months, that abandoned SUV would be the only proof the Morrison family had ever been there at all. The discovery of their disappearance came 3 days later, when David failed to check in with his brother Marcus as promised. Marcus Morrison had received that final phone call about family reset and wilderness healing, had promised to expect contact on June 19th. When his brother's call didn't come, when repeated attempts to reach David's cell went straight to voicemail, Marcus felt the first cold touch of worry. By June 21st, worry had crystallized into fear. Marcus drove the 3 hours from his home in Fairbanks to the trailhead David had described, following directions that led him down increasingly primitive roads until he reached the logging route that served as the family's jumping-off point. He found the Explorer exactly as his brother had left it, keys in the ignition, doors unlocked, camping supplies suggesting a family that had expected to return. But there were no Morrisons, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had drawn them away from their carefully planned base camp. Marcus called 911 from the satellite phone in his truck, beginning an investigation that would consume thousands of hours and tens of thousands of dollars while producing no answers. Alaska State Troopers arrived within hours, followed by search and rescue teams from across the state. The initial response was massive and immediate. Helicopters sweeping the forest canopy, ground teams following every trail, search dogs attempting to track scents that led nowhere. Sergeant Dale Kowalski, a 20-year veteran of Alaska's missing persons investigations, took charge of the search. He'd seen families disappear into the state's wilderness before, usually through poor preparation, bad weather, or simple bad luck. But the Morrison case troubled him from the beginning. The family had been well-equipped, experienced in camping, and had left clear indicators of their planned activities. Their disappearance had the wrong shape. Too complete, too clean, too lacking in the debris that usually marked wilderness tragedies. "Most people leave a trail when they die in the woods," Kowalski told reporters during the first week of searching. "Equipment scattered by animals, clothing caught on branches, something. The Morrisons left nothing." Search teams combed a 40-square-mile area around the abandoned SUV, following every marked trail and dozens of game paths that might have attracted the family's attention. They found old mining equipment, abandoned cabins from decades past, and the usual detritus of human passage through wilderness. But they found no trace of David, Rachel, Emma, or Lucas Morrison. The meadow where the family had spent their last documented hour yielded no more clues than the forest. Search dogs tracked their scent to the far edge where Emma's final photograph suggested they'd entered the trees, but the trail disappeared completely at that point. It was as if the forest had simply absorbed 4 people, leaving no more trace than if they'd never existed. Theories multiplied as physical evidence remained absent. Had the family encountered a bear and fled into trackless wilderness where they'd become lost? Alaska's brown bears were formidable predators, but bear encounters typically left signs: scattered gear, blood, tracks. Had they fallen into one of the region's numerous caves or abandoned mining shafts? Search teams rappelled into every accessible underground space within miles of their last known position, finding nothing. The investigation expanded beyond the immediate search area as authorities considered less conventional explanations. Had the family encountered other people in the wilderness, hunters, trappers, or worse? Alaska's remote regions sometimes sheltered individuals who preferred to remain hidden from society, people who might view unexpected visitors as threats. But again, such encounters typically left evidence, and the Morrison case remained stubbornly clean. Emma's camera, found in the abandoned SUV, provided investigators with their most detailed timeline of the family's final day. Her photographs documented their movement from camp to meadow to the edge of the forest where the unmarked trail began. Digital forensics revealed no unusual electronic signatures, no evidence of tampering. The images showed a family enjoying their adventure right up until the moment they vanished. Lucas's nature journal, meticulously maintained throughout the trip, offered insights into the 8-year-old's mindset, but no clues about their fate. His final entry radiated excitement about exploration and discovery, the enthusiasm of a child who believed the world held infinite wonders waiting to be found. Reading his careful observations about forest ecology and mushroom identification, investigators confronted the heartbreaking ordinariness of a boy who'd simply wanted to document the natural world's small miracles. As weeks became months, the search area expanded to encompass nearly 200 square miles of wilderness. Volunteer groups joined professional rescue teams. Emma's classmates organized fundraisers for search efforts. David's co-workers contributed thousands of dollars for helicopter time. The Morrison family's disappearance became a cause that united communities across Alaska, a reminder of how quickly the wilderness could reclaim those who ventured into its embrace unprepared for its indifference. But preparation had never been the Morrisons' weakness. David's careful planning, Rachel's medical training, the family's camping experience, none of it explained why they'd simply ceased to exist. The case file grew to thousands of pages while containing virtually no useful information. 4 people had walked into the Alaskan wilderness and simply never walked out. By winter, active searching had largely ceased. Alaska's climate made sustained ground operations impossible once snow began to fall, and 2 seasons of intensive efforts had produced nothing that justified continued expense. The Morrison case remained officially open but functionally dormant. Their faces appeared on missing person websites and occasional news segments, but public attention moved to newer tragedies with fresher possibilities for resolution. Marcus Morrison refused to accept his brother's family as lost. Throughout 2022 and into 2023, he organized private search efforts, hired investigators, and lobbied authorities to maintain active operations. His dedication was admirable and heartbreaking in equal measure. A man unwilling to let the wilderness claim his brother without a fight, even when that fight seemed futile. For their friends and extended family, the Morrisons' disappearance became a wound that wouldn't heal. There were no bodies to mourn, no certainty to enable grief's progression through its necessary stages. Instead, there was only absence, empty chairs at holiday tables, unanswered phones, the persistent possibility that somewhere in Alaska's vast wilderness, 4 people might still be alive, still hoping for rescue that would never come. The case might have remained forever unresolved, another entry in Alaska's long catalog of people swallowed by indifferent wilderness. Families disappear in the state's remote regions every year, claimed by weather, terrain, wildlife, or simple misfortune. Most are never found. The Morrison family seemed destined to join that silent majority, their fate known only to the trees and mountains that had witnessed their final moments. But on August 14, 2024, something impossible happened. Lucas Morrison walked out of the forest alone. The hiker who found Lucas Morrison thought he was hallucinating. Patricia Smith, A wildlife photographer from Juneau had been documenting late summer wildflowers in the same general area where the Morrison family had vanished 26 months earlier. She'd hiked these trails dozens of times over the years, knew every creek crossing and ridgeline. Finding a small boy walking alone through the wilderness at 7 a.m. violated every assumption about how the world worked. At first, I thought he was some kind of optical illusion, Smith later told investigators. Kids don't just materialize in the middle of nowhere. But he looked right at me and said, "Hi, my name is Lucas. Can you help me find the road?" Like he was asking for directions to the grocery store. The boy appeared remarkably healthy for someone who'd allegedly been missing for over 2 years. His clothes, jeans, a blue t-shirt, and hiking boots showed normal wear, but it was oversized. His hair was neatly trimmed. His fingernails were clean. Most disturbing of all, he seemed to have aged normally, growing from the 8-year-old who'd vanished to what appeared to be a 10-year-old, despite claiming he'd only been gone 5 days. Smith immediately called 911 on her satellite phone, then sat with Lucas while they waited for rescue teams to arrive. The boy seemed calm, even chatty, eager to tell someone about his adventure. His story, when it came, challenged every assumption about what had happened to the Morrison family. "We followed the trail like we always do," Lucas told Smith, settling beside her on a fallen log as if this were the most ordinary conversation in the world. But this time it went to the underneath place. The tall people said we had to wait there until someone was ready to help. They said I was ready first because I'm smallest. When Smith asked where his family was now, Lucas pointed back toward the dense forest he'd emerged from. "They're still in the underneath place. Mom is teaching the tall people about taking care of hurt animals. Dad is helping them fix their machines. Emma draws pictures of their city. They like her pictures a lot." Alaska State Trooper Sergeant Dale Kowalski arrived by helicopter within 2 hours, accompanied by paramedics and child psychologists. He'd never stopped thinking about the Morrison case, never fully accepted that an experienced family could simply disappear without leaving any trace. Finding Lucas alive contradicted everything he thought he knew about wilderness survival, but it also represented the first real lead in a case that had consumed him for over 2 years. Lucas repeated his story for Kowalski with the matter-of-fact consistency that marked either truth or carefully rehearsed lies. The family had followed the unmarked trail Emma had photographed until it led to what he called the doorway, a cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall that wasn't on any topographical map. Inside, they'd found a vast underground space inhabited by tall people who looked human but weren't quite right. "They're really nice," Lucas insisted. "They said our family was special because we weren't scared. Most people who find the doorway are too scared to stay. But we wanted to learn about their city. It's beautiful down there. They have lights that aren't electric and gardens that grow without sun." Medical examination revealed Lucas to be in excellent health, well-nourished, properly hydrated, with no signs of prolonged exposure or stress. His growth and development were consistent with a child who'd aged normally over the past 26 months. Dental records confirmed his identity beyond any doubt, but his account of events made no scientific sense. Dr. Amanda Richter, the child psychologist assigned to Lucas's case, had dealt with traumatized children before. She knew how minds could construct elaborate fantasies to cope with horrors too terrible to process directly, but Lucas showed none of the typical markers of severe trauma. His affect was appropriate, his memory detailed and consistent, his emotional responses normal for a child describing what he clearly believed to be a factual experience. "He's not lying," Dr. Richter told Kowalski after her initial evaluation. "At least not consciously. He genuinely believes everything he's telling us. The question is whether his memory represents actual events or psychological construction." Lucas drew pictures of the tall people and their underground city with the careful attention to detail that had always characterized his nature observations. His drawings showed humanoid figures with elongated proportions and large dark eyes. Their city appeared to be built into massive caverns with architecture that seemed to grow organically from the stone itself rather than being constructed. "They don't eat food like us," Lucas explained while drawing. "They absorb energy from the crystals that grow in their walls. That's why they needed to learn from Mom about taking care of sick animals. They don't understand bodies that break down and need fixing. When investigators asked why he'd been allowed to leave while his family remained below, Lucas's explanation carried the simple logic of childhood. I was getting homesick. I missed my room and my toys. The tall people said I could go get help for finding the doorway again so other people could visit their city too. They said Mom and Dad and Emma wanted to stay longer because they were learning important things. Search teams immediately deployed to the area where Smith had found Lucas, using his descriptions to look for the hidden cave entrance he claimed led to his family. They found the waterfall Lucas described, a modest cascade tumbling over granite cliffs that wasn't marked on any map. But behind the falling water, they found only solid rock. Lucas insisted the searchers were looking in the wrong place, that the doorway only appeared at certain times. You have to wait for the tall people to open it, he explained. They don't like too many visitors at once. It makes their city too crowded. DNA analysis of Lucas's clothing and hair revealed no unknown biological material, no traces of unusual environments or contact with non-human entities. His clothes contained normal forest debris, pine needles, soil particles, pollen consistent with late summer vegetation in central Alaska, but they also contained something that shouldn't have been there: synthetic fibers that weren't manufactured anywhere on Earth, according to materials analysis conducted by the FBI's forensic laboratories. The fibers were microscopically embedded in Lucas's shirt, as if he'd been in prolonged contact with fabric made from materials that didn't exist in human manufacturing. Chemical analysis revealed a polymer structure that was theoretically possible, but practically impossible to produce with current technology. The discovery sent ripples through both law enforcement and scientific communities, suggesting Lucas's story might contain elements of truth that challenged conventional understanding. Dr. Michael Santos, a geologist from the University of Alaska, joined the investigation to examine the possibility of extensive cave systems in the area where Lucas had been found. Alaska's geology did support the existence of unmapped underground spaces, limestone caverns, lava tubes, and mining excavations that might not appear on official surveys, but ground-penetrating radar and seismic analysis revealed no significant subsurface voids behind the waterfall Lucas had identified. Either the boy is mistaken about the location, Doctor, Santos concluded, or we're dealing with geological features that our instruments can't detect. Lucas remained adamant about the location and his family's continued presence in the underground city. He drew detailed maps showing the route from the waterfall entrance to the vast caverns where the tall people lived. His descriptions included specific landmarks: crystal formations that glowed with internal light, underground rivers that flowed upward against gravity, gardens where luminescent plants grew without soil or sunlight. Emma loves the art galleries, Lucas told Dr. Richter during one of their sessions. The tall people make sculptures from living stone. Emma teaches them about perspective and color. They teach her about making art that changes as you look at it. The boy's certainty never wavered, even when faced with evidence that contradicted his claims. When shown photographs of the solid rock face behind the waterfall, Lucas simply shrugged. The doorway is closed right now. The tall people will open it when they're ready for visitors. Media attention transformed the Morrison case from a local tragedy into a national obsession. Lucas's story captured public imagination in ways that conventional missing persons cases rarely achieved. Social media exploded, with theories ranging from government cover-ups to extraterrestrial contact to interdimensional travel. UFO investigators descended on Alaska demanding access to the boy and the search sites. New Age enthusiasts proclaimed Lucas a messenger from advanced civilizations living beneath the Earth's surface. Marcus Morrison flew immediately to Alaska when he learned his nephew had been found. His reunion with Lucas was captured by news cameras and viewed millions of times online. An uncle's desperate joy at finding his brother's child alive, tempered by confusion about the boy's impossible story and the continued absence of his parents and sister. He looks exactly like David did at that age, Marcus told reporters, but Lucas talks about things. It's like he's been living in a science fiction movie for 2 years. I want to believe him. I want to believe David and Rachel and Emma are safe somewhere, But how do you accept something that makes no sense? Lucas seemed genuinely puzzled by his uncle's distress. In the boy's understanding, his family was safe and happy in their underground home, pursuing fascinating educational opportunities with beings far more advanced than surface humans. His parents had sent him back to the surface world with a mission: to guide others to the doorway so they could experience the tall people's wisdom. Uncle Marcus could come visit, Lucas offered helpfully. The tall people would like him. He's good at fixing things like Dad is. Psychiatric evaluation continued to find no evidence of delusion, trauma-induced fantasy, or deliberate deception. Lucas's cognitive development was normal, his emotional responses appropriate, his social interactions healthy. By every measure, he was a well-adjusted 10-year-old boy who happened to believe his family was living underground with non-human entities. The synthetic fibers found in his clothing remained the case's most puzzling physical evidence. Materials scientists from multiple laboratories confirmed the initial analysis. The fibers represented a polymer that couldn't be manufactured with current technology. Their presence on Lucas's shirt suggested contact with materials or beings possessing industrial capabilities beyond human achievement. Dr. Janet Morrison, a quantum physicist unrelated to the missing family, proposed one of the more scientific theories to explain Lucas's claims. She suggested the possibility of dimensional rifts, or spaces existing outside normal space-time. Areas where different physical laws might apply, where time could pass differently, where beings from parallel realities might exist. If such spaces existed, Dr. Morrison theorized, they might be accessible through specific geological features under certain conditions. A child's perception of time could be altered, making 26 months feel like 5 days. The beings he describes could be interdimensional travelers or residents of parallel Earth timelines. Her theories gained little acceptance in mainstream scientific circles, but they offered the only framework that could accommodate both Lucas's consistent testimony and the physical evidence that supported elements of his story. Winter approached, ending the practical possibility of extensive outdoor searches. Lucas was placed in his uncle's custody, attending school in Fairbanks, where he proved to be a normal student with one exceptional characteristic: an unshakable belief that his family was safe and accessible through a doorway that searchers couldn't find. Teachers reported that Lucas would occasionally draw his underground city during art class, creating elaborate colored pencil renderings of crystal caverns and tall, dark-eyed figures. When other children asked about his drawings, Lucas would patiently explain that these were pictures of where his family lived now, deep beneath the Alaska wilderness, with people who weren't quite people. His certainty never flagged. Throughout the school year, Lucas maintained that his parents and sister were waiting in the underneath place, learning from the tall people and contributing their own knowledge to an advanced civilization that existed parallel to the surface world. He insisted the doorway would open again when the time was right, when the tall people were ready to share their wisdom with a broader human audience. Christmas brought particular poignancy to Lucas's situation. Marcus struggled with how to handle the holidays, whether to maintain normal family traditions or acknowledge the absence of David, Rachel, and Emma. Lucas solved the dilemma with characteristic directness. "We should make Christmas presents for them," he announced. "The tall people celebrate different holidays, but they understand about giving gifts to people you love. I'll draw them pictures and we can leave them by the waterfall so they know we're thinking about them." On Christmas morning, Marcus and Lucas hiked to the site where the boy had emerged from the forest 4 months earlier. They left carefully wrapped gifts beside the waterfall. Drawings from Lucas, photographs of their life in Fairbanks, letters expressing hope and love. The packages disappeared within a week, though Marcus assumed they'd been claimed by weather or wildlife rather than underground civilizations. Lucas interpreted their absence differently. "The tall people brought them down to Mom and Dad and Emma," he told his uncle confidently. "I bet Mom cried happy tears when she saw the pictures of our Christmas tree." Spring brought renewed search efforts as snow melted and wilderness areas became accessible again. Sergeant Kowalski, now officially retired but still haunted by the Morrison case, organized volunteer expeditions to explore caves and underground spaces throughout central Alaska. They found mining shafts, natural caverns, and underground streams, but nothing that matched Lucas's descriptions of the vast crystalline city where his family allegedly lived. Lucas accompanied some of these searches, serving as a guide who confidently led teams to locations that proved to contain no evidence of unusual activity. His certainty never diminished despite repeated failures to locate the doorway he described in such detail. If anything, his conviction seemed to strengthen with each unsuccessful expedition. "The tall people are waiting for the right time," he would explain when searchers found only ordinary caves or solid rock. "They don't reveal themselves to people who are looking too hard. You have to be open to discovery, not demanding it." Dr. Richter continued her sessions with Lucas throughout his first year back, documenting what she privately considered one of the most psychologically complex cases she'd ever encountered. The boy showed no signs of mental illness, no indication that his beliefs caused him distress, no evidence that his story represented anything other than his genuine understanding of events. "He's created a complete alternate reality," she wrote in her case notes. "But it's not a fantasy born from trauma or loss. It's a coherent worldview that brings him comfort and hope. Attempting to convince him that his family is gone would be more harmful than allowing him to maintain his beliefs." The case attracted attention from researchers studying anomalous phenomena, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. Lucas became an unwilling subject for theories about everything from alien contact to time travel to the existence of parallel dimensions accessible through specific geographical locations. But for Lucas himself, the mystery wasn't mysterious at all. His family was safe, happy, and engaged in important work with beings who understood the universe in ways surface humans couldn't imagine. The fact that others couldn't see or access the underneath place simply meant they weren't ready for that level of contact. On the second anniversary of his return, Lucas asked his uncle to take him back to the waterfall one more time. Now 12 years old, he retained the absolute certainty about his family's fate that had characterized his story from the beginning. If anything, the passage of time had only reinforced his beliefs rather than causing them to fade. They hiked the familiar trail on an August morning that recalled the day Patricia Smith had found a lost boy walking out of the wilderness with an impossible story. The forest looked exactly as it had 2 years earlier, green and ancient, and full of secrets that revealed themselves only to those prepared to believe. At the waterfall, Lucas placed his hand against the rock face that searchers had examined hundreds of times without finding any trace of the doorway he insisted existed there. For a moment, watching his nephew's absolute faith in something that couldn't be proven or disproven, Marcus found himself almost believing that somewhere beyond the stone, David and Rachel and Emma were indeed safe in a crystalline city that existed outside normal reality. "They're still there," Lucas said simply. "Still learning. Still helping the tall people understand about surface humans. The doorway will open again someday when enough people are ready to accept that the world is bigger and stranger than most of them imagine." Marcus nodded, no longer trying to convince his nephew that his family was gone, no longer attempting to rationalize evidence that refused to fit conventional explanations. Perhaps the greatest mystery wasn't what had happened to the Morrison family, but why a 10-year-old boy's unwavering faith in their survival felt more compelling than all the reasonable explanations for their disappearance. The forest kept its silence, as Alaska's wilderness always had. But Lucas Morrison carried his own certainty, immune to doubt or the passage of time. Whether his family waited in an underground city or existed only in the protected space of a child's necessary hope, his belief transformed their absence into a different kind of presence, one that promised reunion rather than accepting loss. In the end, perhaps that was enough. Perhaps some stories resist resolution because their power lies not in answers, but in the questions they preserve, the possibilities they protect, the faith they inspire in realities that exist just beyond the edge of what we think we know. The Morrison family had vanished into the Alaskan wilderness on a June morning in 2022. 2 years later, the youngest among them had walked back out with a story that challenged everything authorities thought they understood about disappearance, survival, and the nature of reality itself. Whether Lucas Morrison was the sole survivor of a family tragedy, a witness to phenomena that science couldn't yet explain, or a child whose mind had constructed an elaborate refuge from unbearable loss, he remained absolutely certain of one thing. Somewhere beneath the Alaska wilderness, his family was alive. Well, and waiting for the world to become ready for the truth they'd discovered in the underneath place. The boy's faith never wavered. The mystery endured, and in the space between belief and proof, between the possible and the probable, the Morrison case continued to resist every attempt at resolution, leaving behind only questions that grew larger with each attempt to answer them, and the haunting certainty of a child who had seen something that adults weren't ready to understand.